Step back! Hands visible! The command split the air like a gunshot, echoing through the otherwise calm street. Malcolm McKinley stood still, brow furrowed in disbelief. In one hand, he held a leash. On the other end, his golden retriever, Valor, barked nervously, sensing something was wrong. Mac didn't get a second chance. A sharp click. Then voltage ripped through him, twisting his limbs mid-air before he crashed to the floorboards. Valor howled beside him, confused and helpless, as Mac's head smacked the edge of the porch step. They never rang the bell. They never asked a question. They just acted, and they were at the wrong location. As Mac faded in and out of consciousness, the whir of engines filled the air. Not the distant hum of emergency sirens. These were deeper, heavier, military-grade tires chewing pavement. Vehicles rolled in slow and uninvited, casting shadows that swallowed driveways whole. This wasn't security. This was escalation. Mac had spent most of his life serving the country that just knocked him flat. At 68, he wasn't the image the world expected when they heard the word threat. He was steady, quiet, disciplined. Years in uniform had taught him routine was peace. And peace, for him, lived in early mornings with Valor and afternoon walks past hydrangeas. His small red brick house stood on a street where everyone mowed their lawn on Saturdays and waved whether they meant it or not. He didn't ask for anything, didn't stir trouble, kept to his corner and made sure his flag never touched the ground. Inside, he fought invisible battles, ones with no front lines. PTSD didn't wear boots. It came wrapped in dreams and shadows. But Valor understood. The dog would nudge him gently awake before the memories dragged him under, would press against him when the air got too tight. That dog wasn't just a companion. He was survival, on 4 legs. That morning had been like all the others. Coffee, local news, a glance at the sky to check if it might rain. Mac clipped the leash to Valor's collar, opened the front door, and saw the world fall apart in his front yard. The yard was full of armored men, faces hidden, voices loud, weapons drawn as though he were the enemy. Words were thrown at him fast, too fast. Orders stacked on top of each other. Mac, trained to react under fire, lifted both hands, palms up, nothing in them. But the leash still dangled. And to someone watching through a scope, maybe that was enough. The shock hit before he could blink. Electricity drove through his chest, forcing his body to seize. His knees buckled. The leash slipped. He fell. Valor barked frantically, his body circling Mac's, trying to wake him the way he always did. But Mac didn't stir. The porch boards creaked under the weight of incoming boots. He couldn't hear them, not over the roaring in his ears. It was the wrong house. The wrong man. And yet, he was the one lying broken on hardwood planks, breath shallow, mind rattled. A veteran, a neighbor, a black man who had done everything right. But sometimes the uniform you wore no longer protects you when your skin says something louder than your voice ever could. Valor lowered his frame, a quiet growl rumbling from his chest. He didn't lunge, didn't bark. But something in Mac's stillness, the unnatural twitch of his limbs, triggered the dog's protective instincts. He positioned himself over Mac's thigh, alert, unmoving, a barrier with fur and resolve. "He's got a dog, looks hostile." The shout came sharp and panicked, ricocheting between armored vests. "He's resisting! Restrain him!" another ordered. Mac tried to raise his head. He barely managed a whisper. "This is my place. That's my support animal." But his voice drowned beneath a rising tide of boots and shouts. No one was listening. No one paused. Laser dots tracked across his chest again, one hovering over his heart. Dozens of eyes hidden behind helmets, watching him as if he were armed and dangerous. Mac blinked hard, breath catching. He knew this posture. He'd stood on the other end of this drill before. Only that had been in uniform, in enemy territory. Not here. Not on hardwood planks he'd sanded himself. Not on a porch he'd built with his own 2 hands. But no one was hearing the words coming out of his mouth. Just fear. Just heat. "Taser! Taser! Taser!" The warning rang out. Then metal fangs flew from the young officer's hand. Barbs connected with Mac's chest. Electric currents seized him in place. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't scream. His back arched involuntarily, knees folding beneath him as he collapsed. The leash slid away from his grip as his hand clenched uncontrollably. He crashed onto the porch boards. Valor barked, this time loud, frantic, and sharp. Not an attack, a protest. The dog moved close again, nudging Mac's chin with his nose, pacing tightly in a half-circle around him. When Officer stepped forward, Valor let out another warning bark, his tail stiff, ears up. A call for space. For mercy. He's got an unrestrained animal. Threat potential. Move in. The words stung more than the volts still racing through Mac's limbs. He tried to form a sentence, tried to tell them to leave Valor alone. But his throat was clenched shut, and his jaw locked tight. All that came out was a broken gasp. This wasn't a battlefield. This wasn't some insurgent compound. It was a front porch with wind chimes and a welcome mat. Yet it felt like war. And Mac wasn't the soldier this time. He was the target. His muscles twitched beneath the thin fabric of his t-shirt. Pain pulsed behind his eyes. Everything blurred. The trees overhead, the house next door, the boots rushing past. He heard things breaking. Furniture moved violently, cabinets opening, voices echoing. Kitchen clear. Back room secured. He tried to turn his head toward the doorway, but the cuffs bit into his wrists. His arms were yanked behind him without warning, and the world tilted as they dragged him slightly to one side. His heart raced, chest rising erratically. And Valor. Still resisting, not with teeth, but with defiance. The dog stood his ground until a voice, lower, older, calmer, called out, "Hold on. That's not aggression. That's trained behavior." A different man stepped in, hands low, body still. He knelt, whispered something only Valor could hear. The retriever slowly backed down, tail wagging once in confusion before sitting beside Mac's feet. It took that officer 30 seconds to do what the rest hadn't tried in 5 minutes. Recognize humanity. The older officer recognized the harness, the faded service patch sewn onto Valor's vest beneath his bristling fur. He knelt slowly, using low, steady phrases, not commands. Connection, not control. Valor hesitated, tail flicking once, then gradually eased back, eyes still locked on the man kneeling before him. Mac, meanwhile, was hoisted from the porch like debris, no warning, no care. They sat him roughly on the steps of his own home, arms pinned behind him, knees trembling under the weight of confusion and voltage aftermath. He was surrounded, by his flag, by his flower beds, and by men with weapons, none of whom had asked who he was. His voice cracked as he forced out words. "You've got the wrong place." He coughed once, then tried again, louder this time. "I'm Malcolm McKinley, retired Master Sergeant. This is 121 Oak Street." His eyes flicked between faces hidden by visors. "Who are you even after?" A man finally stepped forward, his presence quieter but heavier, clearly in charge. Name patch read, Miller. He carried a folded sheet in one gloved hand, creased and weathered, stained with sweat. He paused, glanced at the document, then up at the brass numbers nailed above Mac's doorframe. He turned slightly, gaze shifting to the neighboring house, 123 Oak Street. Same trim, same siding, just one number off. A wrinkle formed between his brows, his posture stiffened, and then, all at once, it sagged. "God," he whispered, more to himself than anyone. His shoulders slumped beneath the armor. He swallowed visibly. He'd briefed the team for 121, based on a source that hadn't been checked. Not against updated logs. Not with the new surveillance, just old intelligence. Outdated. Incorrect. Miller exhaled sharply. "Get the dog under control," he said. Less like an order, more like a confession. "Stop the sweep. We're done here." Valor, sensing the shift, edged closer to Mac again, nosing his hand gently. Mac's fingers twitched in response, half pain, half disbelief. His living room had been ransacked. Drawers spilled across the floor, family photos pushed face down, cushions gutted, floorboards scratched. Mac didn't speak as Miller returned. The team leader looked different now, helmet off, eyes unshielded. His voice dropped from combat cadence to apology. "Mr. McKinley, sir, I need to tell you the truth. We were acting on information that led us here in error. The individual in question, he's involved in serious activity, drugs, weapons. The address we were given was yours." Mac stared straight ahead. His hands still shook, but not from voltage anymore. From rage. Error. He turned to look at the man who had allowed this. "You broke into my home. You hit me with a taser. You terrified my dog. All because someone pointed at the wrong mailbox?" Miller opened his mouth, but no excuse came out. Just silence. Until something new pierced the morning. Not sirens, not radios. A different sound, deeper, full of mass and urgency. Engines, not cruisers. Convoys. A set of olive-painted Humvees rolled into view, tires kicking up dust, metal frames glinting beneath the sun. The lead vehicle took a slow left turn, its presence impossible to misread. It wasn't just the police anymore, and whoever had called them in meant business. 2 more Humvees followed, their tires groaning against the pavement. Then a massive personnel truck rolled up behind them like the punchline to a joke no one was ready to hear. But these weren't just vehicles parking. They were units moving with the coordination of professionals honed by years of field work. They didn't stumble. They didn't shout. They executed. Fully geared soldiers stepped out in formation, rifles in hand, body language unreadable. Within seconds, they fanned out across the neighborhood. No hesitation, no uncertainty. The entire block was under firm control before the SWAT team even registered what was happening. Not just 121 Oak Street. 123 too, the house that had never been checked properly in the first place. The street fell silent except for the synchronized thuds of boots repositioning. The local officers stood slack-jawed, radios forgotten in their hands. Their dominance dissolved instantly. The chain of command had shifted, decisively and visibly. From windows, curtains shifted again. What started as casual glances earlier now became frozen stares. People whispered names to each other. Speculations hung in the air like smoke. This wasn't a cleanup. This was a statement. Then, the front vehicle's door opened. A tall man stepped down. He wore a deep green uniform, uncreased and polished, with 2 silver stars on his collar that glinted like a warning. His stride was deliberate, eyes scanning everything. Not a soldier looking for answers. A commander here to deliver consequences. Major General Samuel Armitage. The very name once carried weight across battlefields. Now it carried fury down a residential street. And fate had wrapped this day in strange symmetry. Armitage was Mac's commanding officer from years ago. The same man Mac had dragged from the smoldering wreckage of an APC under enemy fire. A man who had owed him his life ever since. Armitage had been in the air, en route to an emergency training exercise when a scrambled message reached his flight crew. A retired war hero, Malcolm McKinley, had been taken down by local law enforcement in a disastrous tactical blunder. Details were scarce, but one phrase had lit a fuse. Distinguished veteran. Wrong address. Injured in breach. Within minutes, Armitage had rerouted his chopper and activated the closest QRF, Quick Reaction Force. Not just to secure the scene, but to protect one of their own. That call had been triggered by a single text Mac had managed to send, just a few words, forwarded by a contact in a veteran advocacy group with high-level access. It reached the state's emergency desk. It reached the governor. And then it reached the general. Now, Armitage was on Oak Street. He didn't speak as he walked past armored officers with shaking hands and confused expressions. Didn't slow as Captain Miller stepped forward, muttering excuses about warrants and miscommunication. Didn't flinch as radios crackled behind him. He went straight to the porch. His eyes swept over the damage. Mac hunched on the steps, shirt soaked in sweat, skin still trembling from voltage. Barbs still lodged in the fabric. Valor, silent now, leaning into Mac's thigh as though anchoring him to reality. The living room behind them, wrecked. Armitage's jaw locked. His expression hardened, icy, absolute. He didn't acknowledge the officers who tried to justify. He lowered himself beside Mac, removing his cap, resting one hand lightly on Mac's shoulder. His voice dropped, solemn and clear. Armitage crouched closer, his tone shifting to something soft, something personal. "Mac, it's me, Sam Armitage. You hanging in there, brother?" Mac lifted his head, blinking hard through the pain. His vision focused, and for the first time since the morning began, something familiar came into view. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, dry and lopsided. "Sam," he rasped, voice hoarse but steadying. "Been smoother mornings." He shifted slightly, grimacing. "Guess they called it a mix-up?" Armitage didn't return the smile. His eyes fell to the wires still hooked into Mac's shirt, then darted toward the cluster of law enforcement still loitering nearby. "Mix-up?" he said, voice sharpening like a drawn blade. He stood upright, his uniform crisp, posture unyielding. The bars on his collar seemed to weigh the air down. He turned toward Captain Miller, voice calm but thunderous. "Let me get this straight, Captain. You incapacitated a retired master sergeant on his own property, a man with more battlefield time than most of your unit combined, because someone misread an address?" Miller opened his mouth, hands gesturing vaguely as if to rearrange the truth into something palatable. There were credible threats, intel indicated. High-risk raid. Officer safety. Armitage raised a hand, silencing him instantly. "Safety is non-negotiable," he said. "So is strategy, discipline, verification. What I witnessed today isn't just a tactical failure. It's an operational collapse that ended in the unlawful takedown of a decorated soldier and the traumatization of his medical support companion." He motioned behind him. The soldiers from his team began shifting into full control, clear, deliberate, respectful. "Effective immediately, your officers will stand down. Hand over all materials, footage, and notes to my executive officer. The State Bureau and Department of Justice will be taking it from here." Captain Miller's lips tightened into a thin line. He gave a nod, short, reluctant, humiliated. The SWAT team began retreating in silence, each member weighed down by shame. They walked not like enforcers, but like men who'd learned they were replaceable. Armitage turned back to Mac, kneeling again. A medic was already checking Mac's pulse, kneeling opposite Valor, who stayed glued to Mac's side like a second shadow. "Vitals are erratic," the medic muttered. "He needs fluids and a full scan. Possible post-electrical trauma symptoms." "Valor," Mac murmured, patting the dog's back with effort. "He's scared. They need to check him too." "Already on it," Armitage assured. He glanced toward a second soldier already retrieving a canine trauma kit from the lead vehicle. Then he took out his phone. Not to call for backup. This time he contacted the governor directly. Within moments, he'd issued a full report, requesting emergency relief for home repair, long-term support for Mac, and formal recognition for his service. Across the street at 123 Oak, doors burst open again. This time, no mistakes. The real suspect, the one with narcotics charges, stood stunned, barefoot and blinking as he was let out in cuffs. He hadn't planned on company. Certainly not tanks. But justice this time had arrived with precision. An hour later, with every corner of Oak Street under steady control, a secondary unit moved quietly on 123. This time, with precision. No shouting, no chaos, just execution. By then, the chaos around Malcolm McKinley had transformed into a flurry of care. But this time, the noise brought repair, both physical and moral. General Armitage never left his side. He took personal charge of every detail, ensuring Mac's health, the integrity of his home, and the emotional well-being of the dog that had never left his feet. Engineers from the Guard converted their presence into purpose. They replaced Mac's broken front door, reassembled his living room, scrubbed boot prints from the hallway. They even fixed the slow-dripping kitchen faucet Mac had ignored for months. Valor, examined by a military vet, received a clean bill of health, heart strong, reflexes sharp, loyalty unshaken. And when the governor issued a public address later that evening, his tone was somber. He condemned the breach, promised accountability, and called Mac's treatment an unacceptable error against one of our finest. He vowed reform. Consequences followed swiftly. The officer who had fired the taser and the SWAT commander who had failed to verify the address were both placed on immediate leave. Investigations began. Careers were likely finished. A lawsuit loomed. But Mac didn't use it for revenge. The city settled quickly, knowing public trust hung by a thread. Mac accepted, but redirected the majority of the compensation to causes that meant something. Veteran outreach, service animal training, mental health initiatives for soldiers returning from war zones to broken systems. He didn't want hush money. He wanted restoration, correction, clarity. Throughout the day, National Guard troops remained stationed along Oak Street. Not as a threat, but as reassurance. A quiet presence. A visible declaration. This ground belongs to the people who served it. Neighbors who had once peeked through blinds now came to the steps with casseroles, lemonade, and soft words. Some apologized. Others simply listened. The man they once saw as just a quiet retiree with a big dog had become something more. A reminder of what quiet dignity really looked like. In the weeks that followed, General Armitage returned often. Not in uniform, just as a friend. One afternoon, they sat side by side on the freshly painted porch. Valor snored gently between them. "You know, Mac," Armitage said, his voice low and thoughtful. "Sometimes, the system doesn't just fall short. It forgets the very people it swore to defend." He looked out toward the street, where sunlight filtered through the branches. "It's up to us, the ones who remember what the uniform truly stands for, to put that right." Mac didn't respond immediately. He just nodded slowly, his hand resting on Valor's fur. The pain still lingered in his ribs. The bruises hadn't fully faded, but the weight he carried was lighter now, not gone, but carried differently, because something had shifted. Not just in him, but in everyone who had watched this unfold. He knew now. There are still those who show up when it counts. Still warriors who answer the call even when the battlefield looks like a front yard. Because for some, no one left behind is more than just tradition. It's duty. A creed carved into their bones.